Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Christopher. I'm the pastor of Grace Lutheran Church in New Orleans. I thank you for spending time with me today. We're discussing the 15 Bible stories in my life that have shaped and influenced how I understand God and how I understand God to relate to me and how I relate to God. We've looked at a number so far. We're about halfway through. I think this is the 8th story. It's going to be the story of Moses and the Israelites and the Ten Commandments. It's found in chapter 20, the story in particular, the giving of the Ten Commandments. But I'm not going to read it today. Normally I read the scripture out loud and then talk about it. But this story is a long story, and the part that's important is the giving of the Ten Commandments, but I'm not going to spend time ruminating on the Ten Commandments. Instead, I want to talk about why God gave them and how that has influenced me. So, after 400 years of slavery in Egypt, God sends Moses to deliver the Israelite people from slavery into freedom. If you know the story there, Moses goes to Pharaoh, let my people go. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. In other words, he's made up his mind. He's not going to do it. That's what we all have hardened hearts at sometimes. We make up our mind that nothing's going to change it. So Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and God brings 10 plagues on the Egyptian people to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go, to let them become free. Because God has chosen them out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be the children of God, to be God's nation of priests, to present God to the world as a God that will love and nurture and care for the world. That's their job, but they can't do it in slavery. So God sends Moses to deliver them. Eventually, Pharaoh relents after the 10th plague. They come, they camp by the Red Sea. Pharaoh changed his mind again, made up his mind that the God of the Israelites is not as strong as he is, as the God of Egypt. And so Pharaoh sends his chariots and his soldiers to fetch these runaway slaves. And so God delivers the Israelites through the Red Sea on dry ground. God parts the waters. They cross over, and then as Pharaoh and his army begin to chase them, and they get down into the depths of the sea, God lets the water come in and drown them all. It's a sad story from the Egyptian point of view. It is a joyous story from the Israelite point of view. And just a side about that, there's an old rabbinic tale that says at the moment that this happened, all the angels in heaven rejoiced at the defeating of Pharaoh's army. And God tells them to shush, be quiet. They were my children too. So that's not in scripture, but it's an old midrash of the Jewish people that reminds us all that everything on earth belongs to God. Everyone on earth is a soul, a body, a human, a being given life and breath by God. But nonetheless, to move on, kind of helps us remember how we're to look at our enemies, those people who would want to do us harm or wish us ill. That's a nice reminder. Nonetheless, we get on up through that story. Moses is leading the Israelites through the wilderness, following God's pillar of cloud and fire, and the Israelites begin to mumble and grumble and complain because they're hungry, their feet hurt, it's too hot. They were better off as slaves because at least they knew what they were going to face each day, and they had food, and they had water, and da-da-da-da-da. Has to be frustrating, right? As a parent, you hear that from your children. I remember those days. So God brings them through the wilderness to the Sinai desert, and on the Sinai Peninsula there, he brings them to the foot of this mountain, Appropriately, we call it Mount Sinai. God tells Moses to have the people to camp there, and then he calls Moses up the mountain. There, God explains to Moses, this is how I will build my people. This is how I will make myself known to the world through you. I'm going to give you 10 words that will shape who you are and our relationship with each other and your relationship with each other. So go down and tell the people to get ready, and then you turn around and come back up here, and I'll give you those 10 words. So Moses does as he says, and then coming back up, he enters into God has descended on the top of the mountain into a dark cloud. And so God and Moses have this long 40-day interchange of how God and the Israelites will be one. Okay? And it's in this giving of the 10 Commandments, this covenant between God and the people. God says that I will be your God and you will be my people. And I will care for you and I will provide for you. All I ask is that for you to follow my teaching, my commandments. The word commandment, law, and teaching are all the same word in Hebrew. That word is Torah. It has many different insinuations as we use them and interpret them. But when you get down to it, every law is there to teach. Every law is there to protect. Every law is there to guide. And so this instruction, this teaching, this law, these laws are given not in a spirit of separation. If you don't follow them, you're out, and if you follow them, you're in. They're given to us to shape us, who we are and who we are to become. And so God gives Moses these 10 words, these 10 commandments, these 10 laws, these 10 teachings, to shape us into how we will relate to God and how we will relate to each other. And that is how every community has to operate. All the rules for community are for the common good, but they apply to every individual within that community. And that has a lot to do with the contentment, the happiness, and the cohesiveness of that community. We all have these certain things which we call inalienable rights. And in America, we have those outlined in the Constitution. But the Constitution was written for individuals to become a United States. And so God gives these commandments to take a people who have been enslaved for generations and generations, 400 years, and gives them these laws, these teachings, to shape and mold them and us into a people that is distinct and separate from the rest of the world, about how we treat each other and how we relate to God. So these 10 commandments are given to us to teach us how to be more human than we were before. For you see, when we violate these teachings, we're less than what God created us to be. We're less than human. When we steal or lie or cheat, when we do things that are outside of the good of the community, we are less than human. We are less than who God creates us to be. And that is an important thing to me as a human being, that I want to become more fully who God created me to be. And I think that's why God gave me these rules that said, make me your only God. Don't have these other gods. And when you call my name, listen for me. Don't use my name unwisely. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. Take a day to rest. I took a day to rest after I created everything. You take a day to rest. And let all creation rest with you. Take it as a day to relax and enjoy. You know how much better you feel, you and I, when we finally have a day to catch our breath after we've been busy, and then all of a sudden there's a day and it presents itself. and we can breathe, and there's no weight on our shoulders, and we actually have a chance to look back at what's gone on. We have a chance to look back, and if we're cognizant of it as people of faith, we can look back and see where God has been involved when we weren't aware. That's the Sabbath. Day when we make time, not take time, but when we make time to stop and breathe and look back, that we might give thanks for the day we have. And then the rest of those, the second tablet of the law, are all laws about how we treat each other. How do we relate to each other? What are our relationships based on? And every one of them have to do with being content with who God made us to be, being content with what God gives us to use, to have, and most of all, being trustworthy to our neighbor, that we're not going to take advantage of them. So the common good is the greater extent of these individual you shall not, you shall not. It's so each of us can be worthy to be counted as a member of the community of the family of God. Wow. I want to be in that family. There's some times that I don't fit in. And the law's not used to separate me from it. The law is used as a mirror that I might see myself and say, oh, this is not who I want to be. This is not who God created me to be. Paul writes in the 3rd chapter of Galatians that God gives us the law as a disciplinarian. The law is our disciplinarian. Well, that always reminds me of some mean old teacher with a ruler in their hand, ready to whack us across the knuckles, or in my case, a paddle to whack me across the bottom to get my attention. That's how I think most of the world, most of our culture anyway, thinks of the term disciplinarian. But when you look at the word disciplinarian, its root word is discipline. It's also the same root word as the word disciple. Someone who has the discipline of their teacher. Someone who practices the ways of their teacher. To have the discipline to follow God doesn't mean we won't do wrong, but to have the discipline to follow God means our heart desires to go that way. We are an imperfect creature striving toward relationship with God. And God says, this is what it's like. This is what it feels like to be fully human. This is what it feels like to be fully knowing my deep love for you. God gives us the law, not to separate us and cast us into hell. God gives us the law to make us more human. I hope that helps. That's the 10 Commandments in a nutshell for me. I hope you've gained something from this, and I hope you find a story that can help you understand the rules and the way of living that God desires for you. So until then, let's say Amen. And I'll see you tomorrow as we explore the next story that helps Chris understand God just a little bit more. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.